My daughter's fiancé kept asking about our ranch property, and I thought nothing of it. During the wedding, as she stood at the altar about to say, "I do," she handed me a note from her bouquet that said, "Dad, help me." I stood up and I lit a match that would burn our entire lives to the ground. If you are listening to this, please like and subscribe to follow our journey. My name is Jackson Wilder. I am 68 years old, and I have spent my life reading the land and reading people, but I never misread a man as badly as I misread Brett Anderson. The pipe organ in the old Seattle cathedral wasn't playing a wedding march. It sounded more like a funeral dirge, deep and vibrating against my ribcage. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and even more expensive perfume, but all I could smell was the cold sweat emanating from my daughter. I had my arm linked through hers, walking her down the long aisle, and she wasn't just trembling, she was vibrating. It was a tremor that went all the way from her satin heels up to the lace veil covering her face. People whispered as we passed, commenting on how beautiful the ceremony was, how perfect the couple looked. They saw a fairy tale. I saw a girl walking toward a guillotine. Lily has always been the tough one. She grew up on our ranch in Montana breaking horses before she could drive a car. She is an accountant, sharp with numbers and even sharper with her tongue. But the woman clinging to my arm today was a ghost. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her grip on my bicep was bruising. I looked ahead at the altar. Brett Anderson stood there waiting. He was 32 years old, a hedge fund manager, with a smile that looked like it had been polished by a machine. He wore a tuxedo that probably cost more than my pickup truck. But he wasn't looking at his bride. His eyes were locked on me. It was a predatory gaze, hungry and calculating. He wasn't looking at a father-in-law, he was looking at an asset acquisition. For months, Brett had been asking questions about the Silver Creek Ranch. Subtle questions at first over dinner. "How deep is the water table, Jack? Have you ever surveyed the mineral rights, Jack?" I brushed them off, thinking he was just a city boy, fascinated by the cowboy lifestyle. I was an old fool. We reached the altar. The music swelled and then cut out, leaving a silence that felt heavy enough to crush bones. I went to step back to hand my daughter over to this man, but Lily didn't let go. Her fingers dug into my suit jacket. The priest, a man with a voice like gravel, began the ceremony. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? It was the cue. It was the moment I was supposed to step aside and fade into the background of her new life. But Lily didn't move toward Brett. Instead, she turned slightly toward me, pretending to adjust the white roses in her bouquet. Her movements were jerky, frantic. With a sleight of hand that she must have practiced a dozen times, she pulled a small, crumpled piece of paper from deep within the flowers. It was no bigger than a gum wrapper. She jammed it into the palm of my hand, her nails scratching my skin. I looked down. I didn't care about the 200 guests watching. I didn't care about the sanctity of the moment. I opened the paper. The handwriting was scrawled, hurried, written in eyeliner or charcoal. Dad saved me. He framed me for embezzlement. He will jail me if I don't say I do. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The air left my lungs. I looked up from the paper and locked eyes with Brett. He was smiling that perfect porcelain smile, but his eyes were dead. He knew. He knew she had given me something. He just didn't think I would do anything about it. He thought I was just an old rancher, a relic from a bygone era who would follow social protocol. He didn't know about the 20 years I spent as a reconnaissance scout in the Army. He didn't know that I don't see social protocols. I see threats and I see targets. All the pieces slammed together in my mind. The sudden engagement, the way Lily had stopped calling me in the evenings, the way she had lost 15 pounds in 2 months, the questions about the ranch, the water rights. He didn't love her. He was holding her hostage in plain sight. The priest cleared his throat, waiting for me to sit down. Lily let out a small, choked sob. a sound so full of despair, it tore my heart in two. I didn't sit down. I took a step forward, placing my body between my daughter and the man who was hunting her. The church went silent. You could hear a pin drop. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out my old Zippo lighter. It is scratched and dented, a piece of brass that has survived wars and winters. I flicked the lid open. The metallic clink echoed off the stone walls. Brett S.'s smile faltered. "Jack, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I struck the flint. The flame flared up orange and hot. I held the crumpled note over the flame, letting the fire catch the edge. I held it up so Brett could see it burning, so he could see that I knew. I watched the paper turn to ash in my hand, letting the embers fall onto the polished marble floor of the church. "The wedding is off," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. "Get out of my sight." The gasp from the congregation sucked the oxygen out of the room. Brett S.'s mother in the front row stood up, clutching her pearls. But Brett didn't look at them. His face transformed. The handsome mask melted away, revealing something ugly and twisted underneath. He stepped off the altar, closing the distance between us. He leaned in close, intimately, as if he were going to hug me, but his voice was a hiss of venom. "You stupid old man. You just signed her death warrant. I have the video files. I have the bank transfers. The FBI is waiting for my call. She will rot in a federal prison for 20 years. He thought fear would paralyze me. He thought mentioning the FBI would make the country bumpkin freeze. But fear is a luxury I gave up a long time ago. When a wolf bares its teeth at you, you don't negotiate. You shoot." I didn't say another word. I grabbed Lily S.'s hand. Her palm was sweating, ice cold. "Run," I commanded. I didn't walk her back down the aisle. I dragged her. We turned and sprinted toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the church. "Stop them!" Brett screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "Don't let them leave!" The confusion in the pews turned into chaos. People were standing up, blocking the aisle. I shoved past a cousin I barely knew, knocking over a flower arrangement. Water spilled across the floor. We were 10 yards from the doors when a wall of meat in a black suit stepped in front of us. It was Brett S., head of security, a man named Steiner. I had met him at the rehearsal dinner. He was 6'4" and looked like he chewed rocks for breakfast. "Mr. Wilder, please let's go to the back room and discuss this," Steiner said, raising his hands. It wasn't a request. He was blocking our exit. I didn't slow down. I didn't have time to box with a giant. I let go of Lily S.'s hand for a split second. As I closed the distance, my body remembered things my mind had tried to forget. I didn't see a man, I saw a collection of pressure points. I feinted left, then drove my right elbow straight into his throat. It was a vicious strike designed to collapse the windpipe. As he gagged and bent forward, clutching his neck, I brought my knee up hard into his solar plexus. Steiner went down like a sack of cement, gasping for air, curling into a ball. The guests screamed. Someone shouted to call the police. I grabbed Lily again, and we burst through the church doors into the blinding afternoon sun of Seattle. My truck was parked in the loading zone out front, a beat-up Ford F-150 that looked like a sore thumb amongst the limousines and luxury sedans. I had left it there despite the valet's protests because I never trust anyone else with my keys. I threw the passenger door open and practically threw Lily inside. She was sobbing now, hysterical, tearing at her veil. I jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a familiar, comforting sound in the middle of the madness. I threw it into gear and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, leaving black rubber marks on the pristine pavement. I didn't look back, but in the rearview mirror I saw Brett running out of the church, surrounded by his groomsmen. He looked furious, pointing at our truck, shouting orders into his phone. I merged onto the highway, heading east, toward the mountains, toward the only place I knew we could defend ourselves. Montana. The cab of the truck was silent, except for the roar of the wind and Lily S.'s ragged breathing. She was curled up in the passenger seat, her white dress filling the space like a cloud of gathered storm. She had ripped the veil off and thrown it on the floorboard. Her makeup was streaked with tears. I drove for 20 miles before I spoke. I kept my eyes on the road, checking the mirrors every few seconds for tailgates. I wasn't just driving, I was scanning. Old habits. "Talk to me, Lily," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. "Tell me everything. And don't you dare lie to me." Lily took a shuddering breath. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. "He has everything, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am the head accountant for his venture firm. 6 months ago, I found a discrepancy. $5 million missing from the crypto accounts. I thought it was a hacker. I tried to fix it." She paused, choking on a sob. "It wasn't a hacker. It was Brett. He made bad bets, Dad. He leveraged the firm's assets and lost it all. When I confronted him, he laughed. He showed me the logs." She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with terror. "He used my login credentials, Dad. He used my computer. He installed software that recorded me working, and then he doctored the footage. He has video of me authorizing the transfers. He has emails sent from my account approving the losses. It looks real. It looks like I stole $5 million and funneled it offshore." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It was a classic frame job, but executed with high-level sophistication. Brett wasn't just a thief, he was a sociopath. "Why the marriage?" I asked. "Why the ranch?" "Because he needs the money back," Lily said. "The investors are asking questions. He needs $20 million to plug the hole and pay off the debts before the quarterly audit next month. He found out about the water table, Dad. He hired a geological surveyor to fly over our land with drones last year. He knows about the aquifer. The aquifer. The massive underground river that ran beneath my grazing land. I knew it was there. My grandfather knew it was there. We never tapped it commercially because we respected the land. Nestle offered to buy rights in the county last year," Lily continued. "Brett knows that if he marries me, he gets spousal leverage. But if I go to jail, he gets nothing. He needs me to sign the deed over to him as a wedding gift so he can sell the water rights immediately. And if you didn't marry him," I asked. "He sends the evidence to the SEC and the FBI. He told me he has a narrative ready, that I stole the money to run away with a secret lover. He said I would die in prison." My blood boiled. It was hotter than the engine block. This man hadn't just threatened my daughter, he had enslaved her. He had turned her own competence against her, twisting her life into a knot she couldn't untie. Just then, my phone buzzed on the dashboard. It wasn't a call. It was a notification. A video message. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I handed the phone to Lily. "Open it." She swiped the screen and let out a scream that I will never forget. It was a video of Lily sitting at her desk in her office late at night, typing on her computer. In the video, she looks nervous, guilty. The audio is crisp. You can hear her muttering, "I hope this works. I hope nobody finds out." "That's not real," Lily screamed. "I never said that." He spliced it. He took audio from when I was planning your surprise birthday party last year and mixed it with the video of me trying to fix the accounts. A text message followed the video. "You have 48 hours, Jack. Sign the ranch over to me, or I release this video to the federal prosecutor. I also have a little insurance policy on the truck brakes. Hope you checked them." I tapped the brakes instantly. They felt soft, spongy. "Hold on," I shouted. I downshifted hard, forcing the transmission to slow the truck down. The engine screamed RPMs redlining. We were coming up on a curve. I pumped the brakes. Nothing. The pedal went to the floor. He had cut the line. He had tried to kill us before we even left the city. I grabbed the emergency brake lever. "Lily, get down." I yanked the brake and cranked the wheel toward the runaway truck ramp on the side of the pass. The truck fish-bailed tires, screaming smoke billowing from the rear. We hit the gravel ramp hard. The truck bucked and bounced, gravel spraying like bullets against the undercarriage. We ground to a halt, buried up to the axles in deep gravel dust, choking the air. Silence returned to the cab. We were alive. I looked at Lily. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the dashboard with the cold, thousand-yard stare of a soldier who has just realized the war has started. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached under the seat, pulling out my emergency kit and a heavy tire iron. "We aren't running anymore," I said. My voice sounded like grinding stones. "We are going to hunt." I climbed out of the truck and kicked the gravel. I looked at the cut brake line dangling dripping fluid. It was a clean cut. Professional. I took a deep breath of the mountain air. It smelled like pine and gasoline. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I hadn't called in 10 years. It rang twice. "Parnell," I said when the line opened. Jack, the voice on the other end, was raspy like old parchment. "You sound like you are in trouble. I need a lawyer, Parnell, but not a courtroom lawyer. I need a wartime lawyer. And I need Gus. Tell him to bring his toys." I hung up. I walked back to the passenger side and opened the door for my daughter. "Get out, Lily. We have to walk to the nearest town." She looked at me, her wedding dress ruined, stained with grease and dust. "What are we going to do, Dad? He has the evidence. He has the money. He has everything." I reached out and tore the hem of her dress so she could walk. "He has greed, Lily, and greed makes a man blind. He thinks he's playing chess with a farmer. He doesn't know he's walked into a minefield." We started walking down the shoulder of the highway, the sun setting behind us, casting long shadows that looked like giants. "We aren't going to defend you," I told her. "Defense is for victims. We are going to attack him. We are going to feed his greed until it chokes him." "And how do we do that?" she asked. "We give him exactly what he wants," I said. "We give him the ranch. Or at least we let him think we are giving him the ranch." I didn't tell her the rest. I didn't tell her that I had spent the last 3 days since my gut instinct started screaming, digging holes in my own property. I didn't tell her that being a scout teaches you one thing above all else: always have a fallback position. But Brett Anderson had made a fatal error. He had threatened my blood, and in the Wilder family, that is a declaration of war. As we walked, I pulled the SIM card out of my phone and snapped it in half, throwing the pieces into the tall grass. "Let him think we are panicked," I said. "Let him think he swung." The real wedding reception was about to begin, but the only thing we would be serving was cold, hard justice. The Ford F-150 rattled as I pushed it past 70 miles per hour on the interstate, the suspension protesting against the cracked pavement of the on-ramp, but I kept my boot buried in the accelerator. My eyes darted between the rearview mirror, checking for pursuit, and the passenger seat, where my daughter was unraveling before my eyes. Lily wasn't just crying. She was hyperventilating, her breath coming in sharp, jagged gasps that sounded like tearing fabric. She clawed at the door handle, her knuckles white and desperate. "Dad, stop," she choked out, her voice thin and hysterical. "We have to go back. We have to go to the police station. I can't run. Running makes me look guilty. If I turn myself in, maybe the judge will show mercy." "Dad, pull over, please." I didn't slow down. I knew exactly what would happen if we walked into a precinct right now. Brett Anderson had money lawyers and a narrative constructed with the precision of a spider web. We were two flies trying to buzz our way out of steel wire. "We are not going back." "Lily," I said, my voice low and hard, cutting through her panic. "And we aren't going to the cops. Not yet. You don't walk into a lion's den asking for a fair fight." She screamed, a raw sound of pure frustration and fear, slamming her fists against the dashboard. "You don't understand what he has on me. You don't get it." I am already dead. My life is over. I saw a gravel turnout ahead, a maintenance access road shielded by a line of dense Douglas firs. I jerked the wheel, guiding the truck off the asphalt. Gravel sprayed against the undercarriage like buckshot as we skidded to a halt in the shadows of the tree line. I killed the engine. The sudden silence in the cab was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and Lily S. sobbing. I turned in my seat to face her. I reached out and took her hands, pulling them away from her face. They were ice cold, trembling so violently they vibrated in my grip. "Look at me," I commanded. She raised her eyes. Her mascara was ruined, her face blotchy and red. But beneath the terror, I saw the little girl who used to help me mend fences in the dead of winter. She was still in there, buried under layers of corporate trauma. "Take a breath," I said. "Another one." "Good. Now I want you to tell me exactly how he did it. Not the short version. I want the mechanics, Lily. I need to know the layout of the trap before I can dismantle it." She swallowed hard, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. She took a moment to compose herself, her accountant-s brain trying to organize the chaos. "He runs a crypto arbitrage fund," she began, her voice shaky but gaining strength. "Or at least that is what he tells the investors. It is supposed to be low-risk automated trading. But Brett, he got greedy. 6 months ago, he overrode the algorithms. He started making manual leverage bets. Massive ones. He was betting on coins that didn't exist, trying to double the fund's value in a quarter to secure a spot on the Forbes list." I listened, watching her eyes. I didn't know much about crypto, but I knew about gambling. I knew about the sickness that takes a man when he thinks he can outsmart the house. "He lost it," all I asked. $5 million in 48 hours, she whispered. "Client money, pension funds, private equity." It evaporated, Dad. When the margin calls came in, he panicked. He emptied the reserve accounts to cover the hole, but it wasn't enough. And that is when he came to you. She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "He called me into his office at midnight on a Tuesday. He was crying, Dad. He put on this whole show. He told me it was a glitch, a software error. He said we just needed to move funds around internally to balance the ledgers before the morning audit. He said if we didn't, the firm would collapse and everyone would lose their jobs. He begged me to help him fix the coding error." I squeezed her hands. "And you signed the transfers." "He made me use my digital key," she said, looking down at her lap. "But it wasn't just that. He recorded it, Dad. He had a hidden camera installed in the ceiling smoke detector directly above my workstation. And he had another one on the bookshelf." She shuddered, the memory clearly visceral and violating. "He stood over my shoulder while I did it. He was dictating the amounts, telling me which shell accounts to route the money through. But in the video footage he showed me later, he edited himself out. He cropped the frame. He scrubbed the audio." I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was architectural. "So the video just shows you," I said, my jaw tight. "It shows me logging in with my admin credentials," she said. "It shows me bypassing the security protocols. It shows me executing the wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And because he scrubbed the audio, it looks like I am doing it silently. Focused. Calculated. He even used deepfake software to alter my facial expression. In the video, I look smug. I look like I am enjoying it." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with the horror of it. "He created a digital ghost of me, Dad. A version of me that is a master thief. And then he planted the seed money. He transferred $10,000 into my personal savings account the next day, labeled consulting bonus. It looks like a kickback. It looks like I took a cut of the stolen money. It was a masterclass in framing. He had the digital footprint, the video evidence, and the money trail. Any prosecutor in the state would look at that package and offer her a plea deal for 15 years just to save the court's time." But why the ranch? Lily, I asked, shifting the conversation to the ground I stood on. Why go through all this trouble to marry you just to get my land? 5 million is a lot of money, but Silver Creek is just dirt and cows to a man like him. Lily shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. It isn't just dirt, Dad. It is what is underneath it. She reached into the bodice of her ruined wedding dress and pulled out a small flash drive she had hidden there. He left his laptop open one night, she said. I was looking for evidence of the fraud, but I found the geological surveys instead. He hired a private survey team to fly drones over the county last year. They used ground-penetrating radar. I frowned. I know we have water. The creek never runs dry, even in August. It is an aquifer, Dad, she said, emphasizing the word. A massive one. It is a glacial deposit that runs deep under the bedrock of our northern pasture. It is pristine, mineral-rich water, one of the largest untapped reserves in the state. I stared out the windshield at the trees. My grandfather had always said the land was blessed, but I thought he meant the grass. He has a buyer, she continued, a subsidiary of a major bottled water conglomerate. They have been trying to get water rights in Montana for a decade, but the local zoning laws stop them. But if he owns the land, if he marries into the title, he can petition for a variance, I finished the thought. He can claim agricultural hardship and drill commercial wells. They offered him $20 million for the water rights alone, Dad. She said the number hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. 20 million. That pays off his $5 million debt, covers the blackmail money he owes to his other investors, and leaves him with a fortune to start over. He doesn't want to be a rancher. He wants to drain us dry and turn Silver Creek into a wasteland. The puzzle pieces clicked together with a sickening snap. The rush to get married, the prenup he had tried to get her to sign that had weird clauses about property management, the way he looked at the tree line when he visited, not with appreciation, but with appraisal. He was going to sell the heart of my family's young legacy to cover his gambling losses. He was going to suck the life out of the land that 3 generations of Wilders had bled for just to save his own skin. And if you didn't marry him, I asked quietly. He sends the video to the FBI, she said. He walks away claiming he was the victim of a rogue accountant. He has an alibi for the night of the transfers. He was at a charity gala. He made sure to be seen. He set me up to take the fall for everything. If I didn't say I do today, I was going to prison for 20 years. And he would have found another way to come after the land. He would have sued me for the stolen money, won a judgment, and taken my inheritance, the ranch, as payment. She looked at me hopeless and defeated. He had checkmated us before we even knew we were playing the game. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the wind rustle the fir trees. I thought about the war. I thought about the missions where we were outnumbered, outgunned, and deep in enemy territory. I thought about the cardinal rule of survival. When you are caught in an ambush, you don't retreat. You assault through the kill zone. Brett Anderson was smart. He was tech-savvy. He was ruthless. But he made one critical mistake. He assumed that because we were from the country, we were simple. He assumed that because I was old, I was slow. He thought he was dealing with sheep who would go quietly to the slaughter. He didn't know he had just cornered a wolf. I reached out and started the truck, the engine rumbling to life beneath us. We aren't going to the police, I said, shifting the truck into gear. Because you are right. They would believe the video. They would believe the suits and the money. Lily wiped her eyes. Then where are we going? We are going to change the game, I said, pulling back onto the road. He wants a war over the ranch. Fine. I am going to show him what happens when you try to steal land from a man who knows every rock, every cave, and every shadow on it. I looked at her, my eyes hard. You said he edited the video right. That means the original footage still exists somewhere. She nodded. He keeps everything on a private server, an encrypted cloud drive. He brags about it. He calls it his insurance policy. Good, I said. Then we don't need to prove you are innocent. We just need to find that drive. And while we are doing that, I am going to introduce your fiancé to a little thing we call home field advantage. I pressed the gas pedal, and the truck surged forward, heading toward the mountains. The fear in the cab was still there, but it was changing. It was hardening. It was turning into fuel. Brett Anderson wanted the water. He was about to find out that sometimes when you dig too deep, you don't hit water. You hit hell. The tires of the Ford hummed a monotonous rhythm against the asphalt as we climbed higher into the Cascades, the air growing thinner and colder. The silence inside the cab was brittle, the kind of silence that precedes a detonation. I kept my eyes on the road, scanning the tree line, watching the mirrors, my mind working through tactical scenarios like a deck of cards, shuffling and reshuffling, looking for a hand that didn't end in my daughter behind bars. The phone on the dashboard buzzed again. It wasn't the short chirp of a text this time. It was a long, sustained vibration that rattled against the hard plastic of the console. A call. I stared at the screen. Unknown caller. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 3 seconds later, a notification pinged. Then another, and another. The screen lit up with a file download. Don't look at it, I said, my voice rough. Lily didn't listen. She reached out with trembling fingers and tapped the screen. The video player opened. The sound filled the small cabin of the truck, crystal clear, terrifyingly crisp. I'm initiating the transfer now, a voice said. It was Lily's voice. It had her cadence, her timbre, the slight hitch she gets when she's focused. Routing 5 million to the shell accounts in the Caymans. Confirming receipt. It's done. No one will ever know. Lily gasped a sound like she had been punched in the gut. She dropped the phone onto the seat between us, as if it had burned her skin. That's not me, she whispered, shaking her head violently. Dad? I never said those words. I never even thought those words. I grabbed the phone and hit replay, keeping one hand on the wheel. I watched the small screen. There was Lily sitting in her office, the timestamp in the corner marking it as 3 weeks ago. Her lips moved in perfect synchronization with the audio. Her eyes looked focused, cold, calculating. It was a masterpiece of digital forgery. Brett hadn't just spliced audio, he had synthesized it. He had taken thousands of hours of her voice from phone calls and meetings and fed it into an AI to build a puppet that sounded exactly like my daughter. Then came the text message scrolling across the top of the video like a news ticker from hell. You have 48 hours, Jack. Sign the deed to Silver Creek over to my holding company. If the ink isn't dry by noon on Friday, this video goes to the FBI Cybercrimes Division and every major news outlet in Seattle. Your daughter won't just go to prison. She'll be the face of corporate greed for the next decade. 20 years, Jack. She'll be 48 when she gets out. Tick-tock. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. 48 hours. 2 days to dismantle a lie that had been constructed over 6 months. 2 days to fight a ghost that lived in the cloud. Lily curled into herself, pulling her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around her ruined wedding dress. She looked small, broken, the fight draining out of her with every mile we put between us and the church. We have to give him the ranch, she sobbed, her voice muffled against her knees. It's the only way. He wins, Dad. He won. I can't go to prison. I can't survive that. Just give it to him, please. Her despair was a physical weight in the truck. It triggered something deep in my chest, a memory of a different time, of cold nights in the jungle where men broke under the pressure of the unseen enemy. Panic is contagious. It kills faster than a bullet. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded on the loose gravel of the shoulder, coming to a halt in a cloud of dust. I killed the engine and turned in my seat to face her. Stop it, I barked. Stop, crying." Lily looked up, startled by the harshness of my tone. Her eyes were red-rimmed with dark circles of exhaustion. "He has me, Dad," she wailed. "Look at that video, it's perfect. A jury would convict me in 10 minutes. "A jury will never see that video," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt and leaning toward her. "You want to surrender. You want to hand over your grandfather's land, your heritage, because a man in a shiny suit used a computer trick. Is that who I raised? I raised you to ride horses that wanted to kill you." I continued, my voice dropping to a low, intense growl. "I raised you to mend fences in a blizzard. I raised a fighter, not a victim. Brett Anderson thinks he's playing a game. He thinks because he has data and leverage he holds all the cards. But he made a mistake." Lily sniffled, wiping her nose. "What mistake?" "He cornered us," I said. "He backed us against a wall. And when you back a wilder against a wall, you don't get submission, you get teeth." I looked out the windshield at the vast, rugged landscape of Montana stretching out before us. The mountains didn't care about crypto or deepfakes. They only respected strength. "We aren't going to the ranch," I said, making the decision I had been wrestling with for the last 10 miles. Going home was the first thing Brett would expect. He'd have eyes on the property. He'd have drones. It would be a siege, and in a siege, the one with the most supplies wins. We didn't have time for a siege. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, her voice trembling but steadying. "We're going to the boneyard," I said. Lily frowned. "The old scrapyard, why?" "Because that's where the ghosts live," I muttered. "And if we're going to fight a digital war, we need analog weapons." I put the truck in gear and pulled a hard U-turn, the tires kicking up rocks as I swung the heavy vehicle around. We weren't heading toward the safety of home anymore. I was taking us off the grid to a place that didn't appear on Google Maps, a place where cell signals went to die, and where I could meet the only 2 men alive crazy enough to help me fight this war. "Dry your eyes, Lily," I said, staring straight ahead at the darkening road. "The time for crying is over. Now is the time for cold blood." I reached into the glove box and pulled out a burner phone I kept for emergencies, wrapped in foil, to block the signal until I needed it. I unwrapped it and powered it on. "Brett wants a villain," I said, watching the signal bars climb. "Fine. I'll show him what a real villain looks like. We're going to take his narrative and choke him with it." I looked over at my daughter. The fear was still there, but the hysteria was fading, replaced by a spark of anger. Good. Anger is fuel. "We're going hunting," I promised her. "And we aren't coming back until we have his head on the wall." The neon sign of the Last Stop Diner flickered with a buzzing sound that grated against my nerves like a dental drill. It was a roadside dive 10 miles off the main highway, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like battery acid and the waitress has a shotgun behind the counter. It was perfect. No cameras, no digital footprint, just grease dust and ghosts. I parked the truck around the back between a dumpster and a rusted tractor. Lily was shivering again, though I couldn't tell if it was from the mountain chill or the adrenaline crash. I handed her my coat. She pulled it tight around her shoulders, looking small and fragile against the backdrop of the encroaching night. Inside the diner was empty save for 2 men sitting in the corner booth, their faces illuminated by the harsh overhead light. Parnell hadn't changed much in the 5 years since I last saw him. He was 70, with a face that looked like a roadmap of every bad decision made on Wall Street in the last 40 years. He wore a suit that had cost a fortune 2 decades ago, but now looked slept in, the collar frayed, the tie loosened. He had been one of the sharpest corporate sharks in New York, until he grew a conscience, burned his bridges, and moved to Montana to drink cheap whiskey and sue insurance companies for sport. He hated bullies almost as much as I did. Across from him sat Gus. If Parnell was the brain, Gus was the eyes. He was a 65-year-old former intelligence operative who looked more like a retired plumber. He wore a flannel shirt and a baseball cap pulled low. On the table in front of him wasn't a plate of food, but a tangle of wires, a portable server, and a laptop that looked like it had been built out of spare parts from a tank. "Gentlemen," I said, sliding into the booth. Parnell looked up, his eyes bloodshot, but razor-sharp. "Jack, you look like hell. And you brought a bride." He nodded at Lily. "I assume the wedding cake was disappointing." "This is Lily," I said, "and we have a problem that requires a sledgehammer, not a scalpel." I laid it out for them. The crypto fraud, the deepfake video, the threat against the ranch, the 48-hour deadline. Parnell listened without blinking, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the formica table. Gus didn't look up. He just extended a hand toward Lily. "Give me the device," he grunted. Lily handed over her laptop and her phone. Gus plugged them into his rig, his fingers flying across his keyboard with a speed that defied the arthritis I knew he had in his knuckles. While Gus worked, Parnell took a sip of black coffee and grimaced. "So let me get the legal landscape straight," he said, his voice gravelly. "This Anderson character has fabricated a perfect frame job. He has chain of custody on the digital evidence, he has a motive established for your daughter, and he has leverage over the property. Legally speaking, Jack, he has you in a chokehold. If you go to the authorities, the burden of proof is on you to prove the video is fake, and by the time the forensics come back, Lily will be arraigned, and the ranch will be tied up in litigation for a decade." "That is why we aren't going to court," I said. "We are going to make him sign a deal he doesn't understand." Parnell smiled, a wolfish baring of yellowed teeth. "I love it when you get biblical, Jack. What is the play?" Before I could answer, Gus slammed his hand down on the table. "Got him," he growled. He turned his thick laptop around so we could see the screen. Lines of code were cascading down the monitor like green rain. "Your daughter didn't just get framed," Gus said, pointing at a string of text. "She got owned." He installed a kernel-level keylogger on her machine 6 months ago. It is military grade. It records every keystroke, every password, every mouse click. But it goes deeper. It grants remote administrative access. He didn't just record her screen. He could control it. He could move the mouse, open files, and execute commands while she was sleeping, and the system logs would show it coming from her physical machine. Lily covered her mouth, a fresh wave of horror washing over her. He was watching me. The whole time. Even when I was writing in my journal. Even when I was banking. "It validates your story," Parnell noted. "But it is not enough to clear you. A good lawyer would argue you installed it yourself to create an alibi." Gus wasn't done. He was digging deeper, his eyes scanning the data packets he was stripping from the spyware's outgoing signal. "Wait," Gus muttered. "The spyware isn't just sending data to his server. It is syncing with a cloud account. A backup." He tapped a few keys, bypassing the encryption with a brute force script he must have written himself. A file directory popped up on the screen. "I am in his personal cloud," Gus said. "He is arrogant. He used the same password for his illegal spyware as he did for his personal Dropbox. Sloppy." Gus opened a folder labeled Contingencies. Inside were PDF files, dozens of them. Gus clicked on the most recent one, dated 6 months prior. The color drained from my face as I read the header. It was a life insurance policy. A massive one. $10 million on Jackson Wilder. $10 million on Lily Wilder. The beneficiary was a holding company registered in Delaware. Gus clicked another file. It was a policy rider. Double indemnity for accidental death. The silence in the diner was absolute. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to vanish. I looked at the document, reading the fine print. The policy had been taken out right after Lily and Brett got engaged. He had forged our signatures. "He isn't just stealing the ranch," Parnell whispered, his voice devoid of its usual cynicism. "This isn't just extortion, Jack. This is a kill list." I looked at Lily. She was staring at the screen, her eyes wide and vacant. She had thought she was marrying a man who loved her. Then she thought she was marrying a thief. Now she realized she had been sleeping next to her executioner. He was never going to let you go to prison, I said, the realization settling in my gut like a stone. Prison is messy. Trials are public. If you went to prison, you could talk. You could cut a deal. I looked at Parnell. He needs the ranch to cover his debts. I continued, my mind racing, connecting the dots. But once he gets the title, once he sells the water rights, we become loose ends. Parnell nodded slowly. He takes the ranch on Friday. He stages an accident on Saturday. A gas leak. A car crash on these icy mountain roads. He collects the $20 million from the water deal, and then he collects another $20 million from the insurance when we die tragically. He clears $40 million, wipes his debt, and walks away the grieving husband and son-in-law. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like clarity. He bought insurance on my life, I said quietly. He bet against me. I turned back to the table. Gus closed the laptop. Parnell drained his coffee cup. He wants to play the long game, I said. Fine. We are going to give him exactly what he wants. He wants the ranch. We will give him the ranch. He wants a signature. We will give him a signature. Parnell pulled a legal pad from his satchel and uncapped a fountain pen. I assume you have a plan that doesn't involve simply shooting him, Parnell said, though he sounded like he wouldn't mind that option either. I sat back down. He thinks he is smarter than us, I said. He thinks we are desperate country folk who don't understand fine print. So we are going to act desperate. I am going to call him. I am going to beg. I am going to tell him he won. I am going to invite him to the ranch to sign the papers. And then Lily asked, her voice trembling. And then I said, looking at Parnell, you are going to draft a contract. A contract that looks like a surrender but is actually a bear trap. Parnell smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. A honey trap, he mused. We bait the hook with the one thing he can't resist. His own greed. Make it complicated, I told him. Make it dense. Use all that Wall Street legal jargon he loves. Hide the knife in the paragraphs, Parnell. Because when he comes to my house to take my land, I want him to feel like a king right up until the moment the floor drops out. Gus packed up his gear. I will keep monitoring the spyware, he said. If he makes a move, we will know. I put my hand on Lily's shoulder. He bought a policy on our deaths, I said. Let's see if he paid the premium on his own. Parnell tore a sheet off his legal pad and slid it across the greasy table toward me. It was covered in a dense spider web of handwriting legal jargon scrawled with the frantic energy of a madman. He uncapped his fountain pen again, tapping the nib against the paper, leaving small blots of black ink, like periods at the end of a death sentence. This is the instrument of his destruction, Parnell said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that barely rose above the hum of the diner SS refrigerator. We are going to structure the transfer not as a simple deed handoff, but as a corporate acquisition. You aren't just selling him land, Jack. You are selling him a holding company. I will register it tonight. We will call it Silver Creek Resources, LLC. I looked at the paper. It meant nothing to me. I know cattle and I know ballistics. I don't know corporate structuring. Explain it to me like I am a grunt in a foxhole, I said. Parnell smiled, the expression sharp and predatory. Brett wants the asset, which is the water. He sees the $20 million payout from the bottling company. But he is in a rush. He has sharks circling him, debt collectors who break kneecaps, and he is terrified of the FBI. He needs this deal to close yesterday. When a man is running from a fire, he doesn't check the structural integrity of the bridge he is crossing. He just runs. Parnell drew a circle around a paragraph at the bottom of the page. We are going to insert a liability assumption clause. It is standard language, usually boilerplate. It says that the buyer assumes all assets and all liabilities of the entity. But we are going to draft it broadly. Extremely broadly. We are going to tie the acquisition of the land to the assumption of every single debt lien, environmental penalty, and tax burden associated with the property, both past, present, and future. I frowned. The ranch doesn't have any debt. I paid off the mortgage in '89. Parnell's eyes gleamed. It doesn't have any debt yet. But by the time Brett signs this paper, that holding company is going to be radioactive. We are going to construct a financial black hole. And because Brett thinks he is stealing a diamond, he won't realize he is putting a grenade in his pocket until he pulls the pin. He thinks I am a simple man, I said, seeing the shape of the plan forming in the smoke-filled air of the diner. He thinks I am just a scared father who wants to keep his daughter out of jail. Exactly, Parnell said. He expects you to fold. So you have to sell the fold, Jack. You have to give him the performance of a lifetime. If he smells even a whiff of confidence, he will bring in his own team of forensic accountants to tear this contract apart. We need him to bypass due diligence. We need him to sign on the hood of a car in the middle of the night because he thinks he has won. I looked at Lily. She was watching us, her face pale but her eyes clear. She understood. He is arrogant, she said quietly. He never reads the terms and conditions. He says it is a waste of time for people who don't have vision. He just looks at the bottom line. Then let's give him a bottom line he can't resist, I said. I reached for the burner phone on the table. My hand hovered over it. This was the point of no return. Once I made this call, the clock started ticking on my life and the life of my daughter. There would be no more running. The enemy would be coming to my doorstep. I closed my eyes for a second, summoning every ounce of exhaustion, fear, and despair I had felt over the last 6 hours. I thought about the way my hands shook when I found out my wife had cancer. I thought about the feeling of helplessness when the bank threatened the farm in the '80s. I pushed down the soldier and pulled up the old man. I let my shoulders slump. I let my voice crack. I dialed the number. It rang once, then a click. Jack Brett's voice came through the speaker, smooth, victorious, and utterly detestable. I assume you have come to your senses. Or should I hit send on this email to the federal prosecutor? I let out a ragged breath close enough to the microphone so he could hear the tremble. Don't, I rasped. Please, just don't do it. There was a pause on the line. I could practically hear him smiling. I knew you were a smart man, Jack. Nobody wants to see their little girl in an orange jumpsuit. I lost Brett, I said, forcing the words out through grit teeth, making it sound like they were being torn from my throat. You win. I can't fight you. I can't fight the computers. I just want my daughter to be safe. She will be perfectly safe, Brett said, his tone shifting to that of a benevolent king granting mercy to a peasant. As long as I get what is mine. I will sign, I said. I will give you the ranch, the water, everything. Just promise me you will delete the video. Promise me you will leave us alone. I am a man of my word, Jack, he lied. Get the deed ready. I will send a courier in the morning. No, I interrupted, injecting a note of panic into my voice. Not a courier. I don't trust couriers. I don't trust lawyers. I want you to look me in the eye when I sign my life away. I want to see you delete that file. Jack, I am a busy man. Please, I begged. If I am going to lose my family's legacy, I need to know it is over. Come to the ranch. Tonight. Bring the papers. Bring whatever you want. Just end this. I waited. The silence stretched out taut as a bowstring. He was weighing it. He was evaluating the risk. But Parnell was right. His ego was the variable that tipped the scale. He wanted to see me broken. He wanted to stand on my porch and look out over the land he had conquered and know that he had taken it from me face to face. Fine, Brett said. Tonight. I will bring my legal counsel to notarize. If you try anything, Jack. If I see one cop. No cops, I said quickly. Just us. I am too old for this fight, Brett. I just want to sleep. Midnight, he said. And have some good whiskey ready. We should toast to new management. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the table. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I straightened my spine, the years lifting off me like a heavy coat. The defeated old man vanished, replaced by the predator I had kept caged for 30 years. He is coming, I said to the room. Parnell was already writing furiously again, drafting the document that would serve as the jaws of our trap. He is bringing a lawyer, I noted. Parnell didn't look up. Let him. At midnight in a snowstorm on a mountain, lawyers get sloppy. They get cold. They want to go home. And I am going to bury the poison pill so deep in subsection C of the liability addendum that he would need an electron microscope to find it. I looked at Gus. Can you get us back into the house without tripping the alarms he might be watching? Gus scoffed. I built the alarms, Jack. We will be ghosts. I stood up and put my coat on. We have 4 hours, I said. Lily, you stay with Gus. Parnell, you finish that paperwork and meet us at the main gate at 11:30. Where are you going, Dad? Lily asked, anxiety creeping back into her voice. I am going to prepare the house, I said. Brett wants a show. I am going to make sure the stage is set. And I need to move some things. If he is assuming the assets of the ranch, I need to make sure he assumes all of them. I walked out of the diner into the biting cold of the night air. The wind was picking up, howling down from the peaks. A storm was coming. A real Montana blizzard. It was perfect. Nature was providing the cover. I climbed into the truck and checked the chamber of the shotgun in the rack. Empty, good. We weren't going to kill him with bullets. That would be too easy. We were going to kill him with ink. I drove toward the darkness of Silver Creek, my mind already walking through the rooms of my house, visualizing the encounter. I knew exactly where I would sit. I knew exactly which bottle of whiskey I would pour. It was the cheap stuff, the kind that burns on the way down. Fitting. Brett Anderson was coming to collect his prize. He didn't know that the prize was rigged to blow. He thought he was walking into a surrender. He was walking into a slaughterhouse, and he was the cattle. The wind howling down from the Absaroka Range sounded like a freight train derailing against the side of the house. It was a proper Montana blizzard, the kind that buries fences and freezes diesel in the fuel lines. Inside the ranch house, the air was still and heavy, smelling of old pine and the cheap whiskey I had set out on the kitchen island. I sat in my armchair, the leather cracked and worn from 30 years of use, and watched the snow whip past the windowpane. Lily sat on the sofa, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. She looked terrified, which was good. She needed to look terrified. Headlights cut through the swirling white darkness outside, sweeping across the walls of the living room like searchlights. There were 2 vehicles. Big black SUVs with city tires that were struggling for grip on the icy gravel of my driveway. They pulled up right to the porch steps, engines idling, exhaust pumping gray clouds into the storm. Showtime, I whispered. I stood up deliberately, letting my knees pop and my back hunch. I let my hands dangle at my sides, introducing a subtle, rhythmic tremor that I had seen in old men at the VA hospital. I wasn't Jackson Wilder scout sniper anymore. I was Jack, the defeated old rancher who had lost his fight. The front door didn't open. It exploded inward. Brett didn't knock. He kicked the door with a polished boot, flinging it wide open to the storm. The wind rushed in, carrying snowflakes that melted instantly on the warm floorboards. Brett Anderson stepped over the threshold like he owned the place. He wore a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my tractor, and a silk scarf wrapped around his neck. Behind him came the lawyer, a kid who looked barely out of law school, shivering violently in a suit that was far too thin for this latitude. Flanking them were 2 walls of muscle private security contractors with earpieces and bulges under their jackets that weren't wallets. Brett looked around the living room, his lip curling in a sneer of absolute disgust. God, it smells like wet dog and poverty in here, he announced, wiping his boots on my wife's hand-woven rug. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with the manic energy of a predator who has cornered its prey. Close the door, Brett, I said, my voice wavering, pitching it higher and thinner than usual. You are letting the heat out. Brett laughed, a sharp barking sound. You won't have to worry about the heating bill much longer, Jack. By morning, this is my asset, and I plan to burn this teardown to the ground and build a ski lodge. He walked to the heavy oak kitchen table, the one my father built, and threw a thick leather portfolio onto it. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Sit down, old man, he commanded. I shuffled toward the table, dragging my feet. I looked at Lily. She shrank back into the sofa cushions as the two security guards took up positions by the door, crossing their arms and staring at us with dead, bored eyes. The lawyer, whose teeth were literally chattering, pulled a chair out and sat down immediately, opening a laptop and spreading documents across the wood. He looked miserable, glancing at his watch, clearly hating that he had been dragged out to the middle of nowhere in a blizzard. Brett didn't sit. He paced the room, picking up objects and examining them with contempt. He picked up a ceramic bowl from the mantel, a piece my wife Catherine had made a month before she died. It was imperfect, wobbly, and the most valuable thing I owned, quaint Brett muttered. He let it drop. It shattered on the stone hearth. Lily let out a small cry. I flinched, a genuine reaction of pain, but I swallowed the rage that wanted to make me drive a knife into his throat. I let the rage burn down into fuel. Oops, Brett said, not looking at the shards. Clumsy me. Well, it is all trash anyway. He turned to me, leaning his hands on the table, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and ozone. You tried to run, Jack, he hissed. You actually thought you could put me in a truck and drive away from this. You stupid hillbilly old fool. I have satellites. I have trackers. I have people who can find a needle in a haystack from space. You were never running. You were just making me chase you, and I hate chasing my food. I looked down at the table, refusing to meet his eyes, selling the submission. I just wanted to protect her, I mumbled. I just didn't want her to go to jail. She is a moron, Jack Brett said, gesturing carelessly at Lily. A useful idiot. She was a terrible accountant and an even worse fiancé. The only thing she had of value was her last name and the deed to this dirt pile. He snapped his fingers at the lawyer. Give him the pen. Let's get this over with. I have a flight to Aspen in the morning, and I want to be out of this frozen hellhole within the hour. The lawyer slid a heavy fountain pen across the table. It spun and stopped in front of me. I reached for it, my hand shaking violently. I fumbled it, dropping it onto the floor. Look at him, Brett laughed, pulling out his smartphone. He held it up, camera lens pointed directly at my face. Pick it up, Jack, he ordered, recording. I want a souvenir. I want to remember the moment the great Montana cowboy broke. I bent down slowly, my joints cracking, and retrieved the pen. I placed it on the table. Brett, I said, my voice pleading. Before I sign, can we have a drink, a toast, to show there are no hard feelings? I don't want you to hurt her after this. I want to make peace, Marchon. Brett lowered the phone slightly, a cruel amusement dancing in his eyes. You want to toast me after I stole your daughter Aya's life and your land? I nodded, hanging my head. You won, I said. You beat me. I respect a man who can beat me. It is the way of the world. The strong eat the weak. This fed his ego like gasoline on a fire. He puffed up his chest, expanding. He loved this. He loved the philosophy of dominance. Fine, he said. Pour the drink, but make it quick. I went to the counter where the bottle of rot-gut whiskey sat next to 3 glasses. I poured, my hand shaking so much that amber liquid splashed onto the wood. I filled 2 glasses and brought them back to the table. I handed one to Brett. He took it, swirling the liquid, sniffing it with a wrinkled nose. Cheap swill, he sneered. Fitting. He raised the phone again, hitting record. Say it, Jack, he commanded. Say I surrender. Say, you are the better man, Brett. I looked into the black eye of the camera lens. I let my lip tremble. I let a tear leak out of my eye. I surrender, I whispered. You are the better man, Brett. He grinned, a wolfish baring of teeth. That is going on Instagram, he said. He knocked back the whiskey in one gulp and slammed the glass down. Now sign the damn papers. The lawyer pushed the stack of documents toward me. It was thick, 100 pages of legal density. This is the transfer of deed for the Silver Creek property, encompassing all surface and subsurface rights. The lawyer droned, his voice nasal and bored. It also includes a power of attorney transfer for Lily Wilder, granting Mr. Anderson full control over her assets to settle the outstanding alleged debts. I picked up the pen. I touched the tip to the paper, then stopped. Brett slammed his hand on the table. Don't you dare hesitate, Jack. Don't you make me call the prosecutor. I looked up at him, my eyes wide and watery. I have a condition, I stammered. Brett looked like he was going to hit me. A condition. You are in no position to negotiate, old man. I know, I said quickly, raising my hands in a defensive posture. It isn't about money. It is about debt. I gestured around the room. The ranch. It isn't doing well, Brett. We have been struggling. Feed prices, vet bills, there are outstanding balances. I saw the lawyer perk up slightly, his eyes narrowing. Brett waved a hand dismissively. I don't care about your feed bills, Jack. I am worth $50 million. Your petty credit card debt is a rounding error to me. I don't want them coming after my pension, I whined. If I sign this over, I need to know I am free. I need to know you are taking the burden, not just the asset. I can't live on the street, Brett. Please. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the single sheet of paper Parnell had drafted in the diner. It looked pathetic compared to his stack of documents. I had my friend write this up, I said, sliding it toward him. It says you take it all, the land, the water, and the debts. If you sign this, I will sign yours. Brett laughed. He snatched the paper up and glanced at it. He didn't read it. He scanned it. He saw the words transfer of liability and total assumption of assets. You want me to pay your bills? Brett mocked. Fine. Consider it charity. He tossed the paper to his lawyer. Read it. If it doesn't say I have to marry him, I don't care. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his fingers numb with cold. He skimmed the document. It was dense, single-spaced, written in archaic legalese. He was freezing. He wanted to leave. He saw the broad strokes. It appears to be a standard indemnity clause, Mr. Anderson, the lawyer said, his teeth chattering. He just wants to ensure you assume the mortgage and operational costs. It essentially wraps the ranch into a corporate entity and transfers ownership of the entity to you. It is messy but harmless. Messy is fine, Brett said. He grabbed the pen from my hand. I will sign your little permission slip, Jack, and then you are going to sign over the kingdom. Brett scrawled his signature across the bottom of Parnell's document, with a flourish, pressing hard enough to emboss the paper. He threw the pen back at me. Your turn. I took the pen. I looked at the deed. I looked at Lily. She was watching me, her breath held. I bent over the paper. My hand stopped shaking. I signed my name. Jackson T. Wilder. Done, Brett crowed, snatching the papers away before the ink was dry. He handed them to the lawyer. Notarize it. Seal it. It is ours. The lawyer stamped the documents. The sound was final. A gavel strike. Brett picked up the folder and held it to his chest like a holy relic. He looked down at me, his eyes shining with triumph. You know, Jack, he said, leaning in close, I almost feel bad for you. You spent your whole life working this dirt, and I took it from you in 10 minutes with a laptop and a smile. He turned to his security guards. Pack it up. We are leaving. He walked toward the door, stepping over the shattered remains of my wife's bowl. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Lily. You can keep the dress, honey, he sneered. You are going to need something to wear to your bankruptcy hearing. He walked out into the storm, his laughter carried away by the wind. The door didn't latch behind him. It swung in the gale snow blowing into the room. I sat there for a moment, listening to the engines of the SUVs roar to life. I listened as the gravel crunched under their tires, the sound fading down the driveway. When silence finally returned to the ranch, broken only by the howling wind, I stood up. I didn't groan. My knees didn't pop. I walked to the door and shut it firmly, throwing the deadbolt. I turned back to the room. Lily was standing up, trembling. Is it done? She whispered. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the bottle of whiskey. I poured a fresh glass. I didn't spill a drop. I took a sip. It burned hot and clean. I looked at the shattered bowl on the hearth. I would glue it back together later. It is done, I said, my voice dropping back into its natural, gravelly baritone. He signed the liability waiver. He didn't even look at the appendix. I walked over to the window and watched the red taillights disappear into the whiteout conditions of the blizzard. He thinks he just bought a gold mine, I said. He doesn't know he just signed a confession. I pulled my secure satellite phone from my boot. I dialed Gus. He took the bait, I said. He is leaving the property now. He is on your network. Roger that. Gus' voice came back, crackling with static. I see his devices. I am going in. I hung up. The wolf had come to the door. He had huffed and he had puffed, but he hadn't blown the house down. He had just walked into the cage. Now we closed the door. I held the pen hovering over the deed to the ranch, my hands trembling with a performance that felt almost too real. The weight of the moment pressed down on the room like the heavy snow piling up on the roof. Brett stood over me, his breath smelling of mint and expensive scotch, his eyes fixed on the tip of that pen like a starving wolf watching a wounded deer. He was vibrating with impatience, tapping his polished boot against the hardwood floor, a rhythm of pure greed. I lowered the pen until it touched the paper, leaving a small black dot of ink on the signature line, but I didn't sign. Not yet. I pulled my hand back, dropping the pen onto the table with a clatter. Brett let out a noise that was half growl, half sigh of frustration. Sign the damn paper, Jack, he snapped. I am losing my patience and my pilot is waiting. I looked up at him, letting my lower lip quiver, letting the fear I felt for my daughter bleed into my eyes. I needed him to see a broken old man terrified of the future. I needed him to see a victim, not a trap. I can't, I whispered, my voice cracking. Not like this. Brett slammed his hand onto the table, making the whiskey glasses jump. What are you playing at, old man? You saw the video. You know what happens if you don't sign. Do you want me to call the FBI right now? Do you want your daughter to spend her wedding night in a holding cell? No, I said quickly, raising my hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. No police. I will sign. I promise. But I need assurance. Assurance. Brett laughed, a cold, barking sound. You don't get assurance, Jack. You get mercy. You get to walk away without a federal indictment. That is your assurance. I shook my head stubbornly, folding my arms across my chest like a petulant child. It is not about the law, I said. It is about the money. Look around you, Brett. This place. It is falling apart. The roof leaks. The fences are rotting. The bank has been calling me 3 times a day. I am drowning in debt. Feed bills, veterinary costs, property taxes I haven't paid in 2 years. I watched his face closely. I saw the flicker of annoyance but not suspicion. He believed it. Why wouldn't he? To a man like him, failure was the natural state of people like me. If I give you the ranch, I continued whining slightly, I lose my only asset. But the debts stay with me. They will garnish my social security. They will take my truck. I will be homeless, Brett. I can't be homeless at my age. I will die in the street. Brett rolled his eyes, looking at his lawyer with an expression of utter disbelief. Can you believe this guy? He is worried about his credit score while his daughter is facing 20 years for embezzlement. Just sign the deed, Jack, he said, turning back to me. I will throw in $5,000 for moving expenses. Consider it a tip. I reached into the inside pocket of my worn denim jacket. My fingers brushed against the cold steel of the lighter, but I moved past it, pulling out the single sheet of crisp white paper that Parnell had drafted in the diner just hours ago. It looked innocent enough, just a standard legal addendum dense with text. I don't want a tip, I said, sliding the paper across the table toward him. I want a clean slate. My friend, he is a paralegal. He wrote this up for me. It says that if you take the ranch, you take the burden too. You assume all liabilities, all debts, every lien, every outstanding bill associated with Silver Creek and any subsidiary entities attached to the land title. I tapped the paper with a calloused finger. You sign this saying you take the debt, and I sign the deed giving you the land. That is the deal. Otherwise, let the FBI come. I would rather visit my daughter in prison than freeze to death under a bridge because the bank took my pension. Brett looked at the paper with disdain. He didn't pick it up. He just glanced at the header, which read in bold letters, Transfer of Liability and Assumption of Fiscal Responsibility. You want me to pay your credit cards, Brett sneered. You want me to cover your bad management. I kept my eyes downcast. I want to be free, I mumbled. You are rich, Brett. A few $1,000s of ranch debt is nothing to you. It is everything to me. Brett looked at his lawyer, who was shivering uncontrollably in the corner, hugging his thin briefcase to his chest. Check it, Brett ordered, waving a hand at the paper. See if it compromises the water rights. That is all I care about. The lawyer stepped forward, his teeth chattering audibly. He picked up Parnell's document, adjusting his glasses. I held my breath. This was the moment. This was the razor's edge. If the lawyer was good, if he was thorough, he would see the trap. He would see that the definition of liabilities was drafted so broadly it included things that didn't even exist on paper yet. He would see the reference to the shell company, Silver Creek Resources, LLC, which Parnell had just registered and loaded with a toxic asset. But the lawyer was cold. He was tired, and he was dealing with a client who had made it clear that speed was more important than diligence. He skimmed the text, his eyes darting over the paragraphs. He saw standard indemnity clauses. He saw language about mortgage assumptions and tax liens. He saw a scared old man trying to dump his bad bookkeeping onto a billionaire. It looks like a standard hold harmless agreement, Mr. Anderson, the lawyer said, sniffing and wiping his nose. He is just transferring the operational debt to the new owner. It wraps the property into a corporate shell to protect him from creditors. Honestly, it saves us the trouble of evicting him later for non-payment. It is clean. Are the water rights secure? Brett asked, staring at me. The lawyer flipped to the second page, glancing at the appendix where the real poison lay hidden in font size 8. He didn't read it. He just saw the words, mineral and subsurface rights included. Yes, sir, the lawyer confirmed. You get everything below the grass. That was all Brett needed to hear. Greed is a blinder more effective than any hood. He saw $20 million in bottled water contracts. He saw his gambling debts vanishing. He saw victory. He didn't see the cliff he was stepping off. Fine, Brett spat. Give me the pen. I pushed the pen toward him along with the liability contract. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a slow, heavy rhythm. You sign first, I said. Show me you mean it. Brett grabbed the pen with a violent motion. He scrawled his signature across the bottom of Parnell's document, pressing so hard he nearly tore the paper. He didn't even look at the text above his hand. He just signed his name on the death warrant of his own future. He threw the pen back at me. It bounced off my chest and clattered onto the table. "There," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I just bought your debt. I own your mistakes now, Jack. Happy." I picked up the pen. It felt warm from his hand. I looked at the liability contract, seeing his signature sharp and jagged in blue ink. It was done. The trap was sprung. Now all I had to do was bait the hook. I pulled the deed toward me, the document that would transfer my family's legacy, the land my grandfather homesteaded, to this monster. I hesitated one last time, letting the pen hover, and the video I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Brett pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and turned it around so I could see. He navigated to the file with Lily's deepfake. He hit delete. Then he went to the trash folder and hit empty. "Gone," he said. Poof, like it never happened. "Now sign the paper before I change my mind and decide to ruin her anyway, just for sport." I looked at Lily. She was watching me, her eyes wide and terrified. She didn't know the full extent of the trap. She just saw her father signing away her home. I bent over the table. I put the pen to the paper. "I, Jackson T. Wilder, hereby transfer all right, title, and interest." I signed my name. It was a strong signature, the signature of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. Brett snatched the deed from under my hand the moment I lifted the pen. He held it up to the dim light of the chandelier, checking the signature as if he expected it to disappear in invisible ink. "Witness it," he barked at the lawyer. The lawyer pulled a notary stamp from his briefcase. He stamped the document next to my signature and signed his own name. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper echoed through the room like a gunshot. "It is done," the lawyer said, closing the folder. "The property is yours, Mr. Anderson." Brett let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. He hugged the folder to his chest, looking around the room with a sense of ownership that made my skin crawl. "Finally," he said. He walked over to me, invading my personal space again. He was close enough that I could see the pores in his skin, the arrogance etched into every line of his face. "You know, Jack," he said, his voice low and confidential, "I did you a favor. You were never going to make this land pay. You were just sitting on a gold mine scratching in the dirt. I am going to turn this place into something. I am going to drain every drop of water out of that aquifer, and I am going to bottle it and sell it to hipsters in Los Angeles for $5 a pint. And when the water is gone, I am going to pave the meadows and build condos." He smiled, a cruel twisting of his lips. "And I am going to name the septic tank after you." I stood there taking it, letting him pour his venom. Every word he said was another nail in his coffin. "You are a businessman, Brett," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You saw value where I didn't." "That is right," he said, patting my cheek with a condescending tap. "That is why I live in a penthouse and you live, well, you don't live here anymore, do you?" He turned to his security guards. "Get them out." One of the guards stepped forward, his hand resting on his taser. "You heard the man." The guard grunted. "Time to go, wait," Brett said, holding up a hand. "Not yet." He walked over to the mantel where a picture of my late wife sat in a silver frame. He picked it up, looking at her face. "She was a pretty woman," he said. "Shame she died married to a loser." He tossed the frame onto the sofa next to Lily. "Pack your trash," he said. "You have 10 minutes. Anything left in the house after that belongs to me. And I am just going to burn it in the yard." Lily grabbed the photo, clutching it to her chest. She stood up, her legs shaking. "Come on, Dad," she whispered. "Let's just go." I nodded slowly. I didn't look at Brett. I didn't want him to see the look in my eyes. I didn't want him to see the satisfaction. We grabbed the 2 duffel bags we had packed earlier. I took my coat from the rack. I put my hat on, pulling the brim low. We walked to the door. The wind was still howling outside, a banshee screaming in the night. I opened the door, and the cold hit us like a physical blow. Snow swirled into the room, dancing across the floorboards. Brett stood in the center of the room, the deed in one hand, a glass of my whiskey in the other. He looked like a king in his castle. "Don't come back, Jack," he called out as we stepped onto the porch. "If I see your truck on my road again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. And tell your daughter to update her resume. I hear fast food places are hiring." He laughed again, a sound that followed us out into the storm. I closed the door behind me. I heard the lock click. I walked down the steps, guiding Lily through the snow toward the truck. We didn't speak, we didn't look back. We climbed into the cab of the truck. It was freezing inside. I started the engine and let it idle for a moment, watching the windows of my house. I could see Brett's silhouette moving past the curtains. He was pacing, celebrating. He thought he had won the war. He thought he had stripped me of everything. He didn't know that the paper he had just signed, the one he had tossed carelessly into his briefcase alongside the deed, was a legally binding confession. He didn't know that by assuming the liabilities of Silver Creek Resources LLC, he had just personally guaranteed a debt that didn't exist an hour ago, but was about to become the heaviest anchor in the world. And he certainly didn't know that the water he was so desperate to sell, the water he had leveraged his entire life to acquire, was no longer for sale. I put the truck in gear and drove down the long driveway, the snow crunching under my tires. "He told us to get out," I said to Lily, my voice calm and steady in the darkness. "So we are going. But we aren't going far." I drove to the end of the property line where the county road met the highway. I pulled over and killed the lights. "Now," I said, reaching for my satellite phone. "We pull the trigger." I dialed Gus. "He signed," I said. "He is in the house. The Wi-Fi is active." "Copy that," Gus replied, his voice tinny in my ear. "I am in his cloud. I see the sync. He is uploading the deed scan." "Block it," I said, "and download the original video file. The unedited one." "Done," Gus said. "And Jack, you might want to tell Parnell to file that liability contract with the county clerk. The electronic portal opens in 5 minutes." "Do it," I said. I hung up the phone and looked back toward the ranch house, a tiny speck of light in the vast darkness of the blizzard. Brett Anderson was sitting by my fire drinking my whiskey, thinking he was the smartest man in the world. He was about to find out that in Montana, when you steal a man's horse, you better make sure you ride it far enough away that he can't walk you down. Because I was coming. And I was bringing the storm with me. The taillights of the black SUVs faded into the swirling white void of the blizzard, swallowed by the night like a bad memory. The rumble of their engines died away, replaced by the howling wind that rattled the window panes of the ranch house. I stood at the window for a long moment, watching the emptiness where my enemy had just been. Then I exhaled. It wasn't a sigh of defeat. It was the release of a breath I had been holding for 6 hours. I turned away from the glass. I rolled my shoulders, feeling the tension pop in my neck. I straightened my spine, letting the stoop of the defeated old man fall away. My hands, which had trembled so convincingly moments ago, were now steady as rock. I walked to the kitchen island and picked up the glass of whiskey I had poured for myself. I didn't sip it this time. I drank it down in one smooth swallow, letting the heat burn away the taste of the lies I had just told. Lily was still sitting on the sofa, clutching the picture frame to her chest. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet, confusion warring with the terror that had become her constant companion. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. You signed it. You gave it to him. It is gone." I set the glass down on the counter with a solid thud. "I didn't give him anything." "Lily," I said, my voice strong and clear. "I fed him." I walked over to the fireplace and picked up a poker, stirring the dying embers of the fire until they flared back to life. The warmth felt good against my skin. 3 days ago, I said, staring into the flames. When Brett started asking about the water tables at dinner, when he asked about the zoning laws, something in my gut twisted. It was the same feeling I used to get in the jungle right before a tripwire snapped. I turned to face my daughter. I didn't know about the embezzlement then. I didn't know about the blackmail. But I knew him. I knew he looked at this land and saw dollar signs, not soil. So the morning before the rehearsal dinner, I took a drive. I didn't go into town to get a haircut like I told you. I went to the state capitol. Lily frowned, lowering the picture frame. Why? To see a friend of mine at the Department of the Interior? I said. We served together in '91. He owes me a favor. Actually, he owes me a leg, but who is counting? I walked back to the table where the ghost of the contract still seemed to linger. I placed the ranch into a federal conservation easement, Lily. She stared at me, blinking. I don't understand. It is a legal designation, I explained. It is irrevocable. It is permanent. It means that as of 48 hours ago, Silver Creek Ranch is a protected wildlife corridor. It is designated habitat for the sage grouse and the cutthroat trout. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The terms of the easement are strict. No commercial development. No subdivision. No industrial activity. And absolutely, under no circumstances, any extraction of subsurface water for commercial sale. Lilia's mouth fell open. I mean Brett just bought 20,000 acres of very pretty scenery that he can never touch, I said. He can't drill a well. He can't build a bottling plant. He can't even pave a driveway without a federal permit, which he will never get. The water rights he thinks are worth $20 million. They are worth zero. The moment he tries to tap that aquifer, the EPA will descend on him so hard his grandchildren will feel it. Lily started to laugh. It was a jagged, hysterical sound at first, but then it smoothed out into genuine relief. He bought a nature preserve, she gasped. He spent his leverage on a park. Oh, it gets better, I said, my eyes gleaming. I picked up the copy of the liability contract Parnell had drafted, the one Brett had signed with such arrogant carelessness. Remember that shell company Parnell mentioned, Silver Creek Resources, LLC? Lily nodded. I told you I needed to move some things before he arrived, I said. I wasn't moving furniture. I was moving debt. I tapped the paper. Parnell didn't just register that LLC tonight. He reactivated an old one. One I acquired this morning for $1 from a mining outfit that went belly up in the '90s. It was a toxic asset, Lily. A corporate corpse that nobody wanted to touch because it came with a little baggage. What kind of baggage, she asked. Environmental remediation fines, I said. Massive ones. The company is on the hook for cleaning up heavy metal runoff in 3 counties. The bill is currently sitting at $4 million plus interest and penalties from the state. I looked at Brett's signature on the document. It was bold, aggressive, the signature of a man who thought he was conquering the world. When he signed this, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, he didn't just agree to pay my credit cards. He personally guaranteed that $4 million debt. He assumed full fiscal responsibility for the cleanup. The state has been looking for a solvent owner to pin those fines on for 20 years. And Brett just volunteered. I walked over to Lily and gently took the picture frame from her hands. I placed it back on the mantel. He thinks he stripped me of my assets, I said. But all he did was strip himself of his future. He walked into this house a millionaire, and he walked out a debtor. He owns a worthless piece of land that he can't sell and can't develop, and he owes the government more money than he has liquid cash to pay. Lily stood up, her legs shaky but holding. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and disbelief. You destroyed him, she whispered. You didn't just stop him. You ended him. I didn't do anything, I said, pouring myself another splash of whiskey. I just opened the door. He is the one who walked through it. Greed is a heavy burden, Lily. I just gave him a little more to carry. The wind rattled the door again, a reminder of the storm raging outside. Brett was out there now, probably sitting in the back of his heated SUV sipping champagne, dreaming of his water empire. He had no idea that the ink drying in his briefcase was a confession to a financial suicide. But we aren't done yet, I said, my tone hardening. We had taken his future money. We had neutralized the threat to the land. But there was still the matter of the present. There was still the video. There was still the fact that he held my daughter's reputation hostage on a hard drive. I looked up at the ceiling toward the attic hatch. "Gus," I called out. There was a creak of floorboards above us, followed by the sound of footsteps. The attic ladder slid down, and Gus descended, clutching a tablet computer that glowed with a pale blue light. He looked like a gnome who had just found a pot of gold. "Did you get it?" I asked. Gus grinned, his teeth yellow in the dim light. "Better," he said. "He connected to your Wi-Fi jack, just like we knew he would." He couldn't resist uploading the scan of the deed to his partners immediately. He wanted to brag. Gus tapped the screen of the tablet. While he was uploading the deed, I was downloading his life. I got into his cloud. I found the directory where he keeps the raw footage, the unedited files. He turned the tablet around. On the screen was a video file thumbnail. It showed Lily in her office, but the timestamp was different. And in the corner of the frame, clear as day, was Brett. He was leaning over her shoulder, his hand gripping the back of her chair, his face twisted in a snarl. "I have the audio too," Gus said. "You can hear him threatening her. You can hear him dictating the wire transfers. It proves coercion. It proves fraud. It proves everything." I looked at the image. It was the silver bullet. It was the end of the nightmare. Lily looked at the screen, tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. They were tears of liberation. "We have him," she whispered. "Not yet," I said. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 1 a.m. "He is going to hold a press conference in 2 days," I said. "He told me. He wants to announce the acquisition to his investors. He wants to take a victory lap." I looked at Parnell, who had emerged from the back room where he had been listening. "Parnell," I said, "send the liability contract to the county clerk. File it electronically right now. Make sure the state tax board gets a notification that Silver Creek Resources LLC has a new solvent owner." "Consider it done," Parnell said, pulling out his phone. "And Gus," I said, "keep that video safe. We aren't going to send it to the police." "Not yet." "Why not?" Lily asked. "Because," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "Brett likes an audience. He likes to be the center of attention. So we are going to give him the biggest audience of his life." I walked to the window and looked out at the storm. The snow was piling up, covering the tracks of the SUVs, burying the evidence of the invasion. By morning, the ranch would look pristine, untouched, innocent. Just like us. "Let him have his celebration," I said. "Let him gather his investors and his press and his admirers. Let him climb all the way to the top of the mountain." I turned back to my team, my family. Because the fall is much longer from the top. And I want to be there to watch him hit the ground. While Brett was busy gloating over his victory lap downstairs, mesmerizing himself with the sound of his own voice, a different kind of war was being fought 12 feet above our heads. Gus was wedged into the crawl space of the attic, nestled between rolls of pink fiberglass insulation and the rough-hewn rafters that my grandfather had cut by hand. He had been up there since 4 p.m, lying motionless in the freezing dark like a spider, waiting for a fly to land on his web. He wasn't just hiding, he was hunting. I had set the stage perfectly. I had told Brett that the storm had knocked out the local cell towers, which wasn't a lie, but I had neglected to mention that my satellite internet was still broadcasting a strong signal. It was a honeypot. A man like Brett Anderson is addicted to connectivity. He needs the digital dopamine hit of checking his portfolio, his messages, and his ego. I knew the moment he stepped into the house and saw the 0 bars on his phone, his instinct would be to hunt for Wi-Fi. And he did. While I was fumbling with the whiskey bottle, pouring drinks with my shaking hands, I saw him pull out his phone. I saw him tap the settings. I saw the moment his device shook hands with the router labeled Silver Creek Guest. He didn't know that the router was a modified interceptor node that Gus had built out of spare parts and military-grade code. Brett wasn't connecting to the internet. He was connecting directly to Gus. Up in the attic, Gus was watching a tablet screen that glowed with the green cascading code of a packet sniffer. He watched as Brett opened his secure cloud app. He watched as Brett started a live stream to a private group chat titled The Winner's Circle, probably to show off his conquest to his creditors and cronies. That was the mistake. That was the open door. Gus bypassed the encryption using the open session key from the live stream. He didn't just look through the keyhole, he kicked the door down. He was inside Brett's digital brain. But nature has a way of complicating even the best plans. The blizzard outside was intensifying. The wind was hammering the satellite dish on the roof, turning it into a sail. The signal strength began to fluctuate wildly. Downstairs, I was playing the part of the broken old man, listening to Brett insult my wife's memory, but my ears were tuned to the ceiling. I knew Gus was racing against time. He had to find the original unedited video file of Lily, the one Brett had kept as his insurance policy, and download it before Brett finished his drink and walked out the door. If Brett left the geofence of the Wi-Fi network, the download would fail. If the file was corrupted, we would have nothing. Above us, Gus' fingers were flying across a silent rubber keyboard. He found the directory. He found the folder labeled Leverage. He found the raw footage. It was a massive file, high-definition video and uncompressed audio. He hit download. The progress bar appeared on his screen, crawling forward with agonizing slowness. 10%. 20%. The wind shrieked, and the connection dropped for a split second before re-establishing. The bar stalled. Downstairs, Brett was laughing at something his lawyer said. "I need a bathroom," he announced, suddenly looking around with disdain. "All this whiskey goes right through me." My heart hammered against my ribs. The guest bathroom was in the hallway, right next to the access panel for the attic. If Gus made a sound, if he shifted his weight on a loose board, it would be over. "Use the one down the hall," I said, pointing with a trembling hand. "Second door on the left." Brett walked down the hallway, his heavy boots thudding on the floorboards. Up in the attic, Gus saw the download bar hit 50%. He was sweating despite the freezing temperature. He shifted his leg, trying to relieve a cramp that had been building for hours. It was a small movement. Tiny. But in an old house, silence amplifies everything. Creak. It wasn't loud, but to a trained ear, it was unmistakable. It was the sound of weight shifting on wood where no weight should be. One of the security guards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, who had been standing by the front door, snapped his head up. He looked at the ceiling. His eyes narrowed. He wasn't a sloppy amateur like Brett. He was a professional. He knew the difference between the wind settling a house and a footstep. "Did you hear that?" the guard asked his partner, his hand moving instinctively to the inside of his jacket. "Hear what?" the other guard asked, bored and checking his nails. "Movement upstairs," the scarred guard said. He stepped away from the door, moving toward the hallway where the attic hatch was located. He pulled a flashlight from his belt. I froze. If he went up there, if he shone that light into the crawl space, he would see Gus. He would see the equipment. The game would be over. They would kill Gus, and then they would kill us, and burn the house down to cover the evidence. I looked at Lily. She saw the guard moving too. Her eyes were wide with panic. I had to stop him. I had to create a distraction big enough to break his focus, but natural enough not to raise suspicion. I was holding the whiskey bottle, the cheap glass heavy in my hand. I needed a catalyst. Brett was coming back from the bathroom, zipping up his fly. The guard was 5 feet from the hallway entrance. I let my legs buckle. I let out a groan of genuine pain and despair, allowing the stress of the night to buckle my knees. I stumbled forward, slamming my hip into the kitchen island. My hand spasmed. I threw the whiskey bottle. It smashed against the stone hearth of the fireplace, exploding in a shower of glass and amber liquid. The alcohol hit the embers of the fire and whooshed into a sudden blue and orange flare, a fireball that roared up the chimney. The sound was tremendous. The shattering glass, the roar of the fire, the sudden flash of light. Both guards spun around, weapons half drawn. Brett jumped back, cursing as sparks flew onto the rug. "What the hell is wrong with you, old man?" Brett shouted, brushing ash off his camel hair coat. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, putting my hands over my face. "I am sorry," I wailed, my voice muffled. I am so tired. I ruined everything." I broke the bottle. It was the last bottle. The scarred guard looked at me lying on the floor, a pathetic heap of defeat. He looked at the fire dying down in the grate. He looked back at the hallway ceiling, then shrugged. He relaxed his hand away from his weapon. He decided it was just an old house settling and an old man falling apart. "Pick him up," Brett ordered the guards, disgusted. "He is embarrassing himself." The guards hauled me to my feet. I hung limp dead weight, letting them drag me back to the chair. "Get it together," Jack Brett sneered. "You are pathetic." I wiped my eyes, risking a glance upward. In the attic, the distraction had bought the seconds Gus needed. The wind had died down for a brief moment of calm. The connection stabilized. The progress bar surged. 80%. 90. Gus held his breath. 99. Done. The file transfer complete notification flashed green on his screen. But Gus didn't stop there. He was deep in the system now, and he was greedy. He saw another folder, a cache of chat logs synced from an encrypted messaging app. He dragged that folder into the download queue as well. It was small text files. They transferred instantly. Downstairs, Brett was checking his watch. "All right, we are done here," he said. "I have the deed. I have the power of attorney. And I have a headache from the smell of this place." He grabbed his briefcase. "Let us move out." He walked out the door, and the entourage followed him. The moment the door clicked shut, the tension in the room evaporated, leaving us lightheaded and dizzy. I waited until the taillights disappeared. Then I looked up. "Clear," I said. Gus dropped the ladder and scrambled down his laptop, clutched to his chest like a baby. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the kitchen table, cleared away the broken glass, and set his machine down. He opened the files. We gathered around the blue glow of the screen. Gus clicked on the video file. It was the same scene we had watched in the truck, but the audio was different. I heard Brett's voice, clear and menacing, coming from off-camera. "Type the code, Lily," he was saying. "Do it, or I send the emails. I will destroy your father. I will burn that ranch to the ground." Then we saw Lily crying, shaking, typing the commands as he dictated them. "Please don't hurt him," she sobbed on the video. "I am doing it. Just leave him alone." "Good girl, Brett." Voice sneered. "Now smile. Look like you enjoy stealing." It was undeniable proof. It showed coercion. It showed duress. It showed him directing the crime. But Gus wasn't looking at the video. He was looking at the chat logs he had snatched in the final seconds. "Jack, look at this," Gus whispered. He pulled up a transcript of a conversation between Brett and a user named Vlad the Impaler. Vlad: "You are late with the payment. Anderson: The interest is compounding. Brett, I am getting the ranch on Friday. The water deal is locked. I will have your money on Monday. Vlad. If you don't, we aren't coming for the money. We are coming for your knees, and then we are coming for the girl. Gus scrolled down. Brett. Don't worry. Once I have the property, the old man and the girl are going to have an accident on the mountain roads. Brake failure. Icy turn. No witnesses. The insurance payout will cover the rest of the juice. I stared at the words on the screen. The text was cold, black and white, but it dripped with blood. He wasn't just going to frame you, I said to Lily, my voice hollow. He sold us. He sold our lives to the Russian mob to cover his bets. Parnell leaned in, reading the logs. This isn't just fraud anymore, he said softly. This is conspiracy to commit capital murder. This is RICO territory. If we give this to the FBI, they won't just arrest him. They will bury him under the prison. I looked at the screen. We had the weapon. We had the nuke. But I didn't want to just hand it to a federal agent in a suit. That was too impersonal. Brett Anderson had come into my house. He had threatened my child. He had shattered my wife's bowl. He wanted to be famous, I said, looking at the chat logs where Brett bragged about his genius. He wanted to be the man who conquered the mountain. I turned to Gus. Can you hijack a projector feed? I asked. Gus cracked his knuckles, a wicked grin spreading across his face. If it has a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi signal, I can make it play Mickey Mouse cartoons if I want to. Brett is having a party on Monday, I said, at the Grand Hotel in Seattle, ideally, to announce his acquisition of the Silver Creek water rights. I picked up the shard of pottery from the hearth, turning it over in my fingers. I think we should RSVP. The Grand Hotel in Seattle smelled like lilies and leverage. It was the kind of place where the carpet was so thick it swallowed your footsteps, and the air conditioning was set to a temperature that kept the ice sculptures from melting. Inside the main ballroom, 300 of the wealthiest people in the Pacific Northwest were sipping champagne and waiting to be told how they could become even richer. At the front of the room, standing on a raised stage bathed in a spotlight that cost more to rent than my tractor cost to buy, was Brett Anderson. He looked like a golden idol. He was wearing a new tuxedo, midnight blue with a black lapel, and he was holding a microphone like it was a scepter. Behind him, a massive 60-foot LED screen displayed a drone shot of Silver Creek Ranch. My ranch. My home. He was selling it. He was selling the water underneath it, the grass on top of it, and the view from my front porch. He was spinning a fairy tale about sustainable hydration and aquifer management using buzzwords that meant nothing but sounded expensive. I stood outside the double mahogany doors, my hand resting on the brass handle. Beside me stood Lily. She wasn't the broken girl shivering in a truck cab anymore. She wasn't the victim weeping in a wedding dress. We had stopped at a boutique on the way into the city, and she had spent the last of her savings on a suit. It was red. Not a soft red, not a rose red. It was the color of fresh arterial blood. It was tailored sharp enough to cut glass, and she wore it like armor. Her hair was pulled back tight, her makeup flawless, her chin held high enough to look the devil in the eye. I was wearing my Sunday best. My boots were polished, my jeans were starched stiff, and I wore a charcoal jacket over a white Western shirt with a bolo tie made of turquoise and silver. I had my Stetson in my hand. I didn't look like a businessman. I looked like exactly what I was, a man of the land who had come to town to settle a debt. "Are you ready?" I asked her. Lily adjusted her cuffs. Her hands were steady. "Let's burn it down, Dad," she said. I pushed the doors open. We didn't sneak in. We walked down the center aisle, cutting through the crowd like a plow through snow. The murmur of conversation died instantly. Heads turned, glasses lowered. The silence spread outward from us, a ripple of confusion and curiosity. We were anomalies. We were grit in the oyster. Brett was in the middle of a sentence talking about quarterly returns when he saw us. He faltered. For a split second, the mask slipped, and I saw a flash of genuine fear in his eyes. He thought we were ghosts. He thought we were defeated, broken people who should be crying in a motel room somewhere. But then his arrogance kicked back in. He saw an old man in a cowboy hat and a girl he had already crushed. He saw an opportunity to humiliate us one last time, to show his investors just how ruthless he could be. He smiled that porcelain smile and spread his arms wide. "Well, look who decided to crash the party." He boomed over the PA system, his voice dripping with condescension. The spotlight swung toward us, blinding me for a moment. I kept walking, my boots thudding heavy and rhythmic on the hardwood floor. We didn't stop until we were 10 feet from the stage, right in the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brett announced, gesturing at us like we were circus animals. "Allow me to introduce my former father-in-law, Jackson Wilder, and his lovely daughter, Lily." There were a few polite chuckles from the crowd sycophants desperate to please the man of the hour. Brett leaned over the edge of the stage, looking down at us. "Did you come to congratulate me, Jack?" he asked, his voice amplified, booming through the hall. "Did you come to see what real success looks like? Or did you just run out of gas money and come here to beg for bus fare back to the trailer park?" The laughter was louder this time, cruel and sharp. Lily didn't flinch. She stared up at him, her face a mask of cold fury. I put my hat on, pulling the brim low over my eyes. I looked at the man who had threatened my child, who had stolen my peace, who had tried to turn my legacy into a plastic bottle. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a gun. I didn't pull out a knife. I pulled out a laser pointer, the kind I used to play with the barn cats. I didn't say a word. I just raised my arm and pointed the red dot at the massive screen behind him, directly at the drone footage of my ranch. Brett frowned, confused. "What are you doing, old man?" "You think this is a game? Security, get them out of here." Two large men in suits started moving toward us from the wings. But I wasn't pointing at the ranch. I was signaling Gus. Outside, in a nondescript van parked in the loading dock, Gus hit the enter key. The drone footage on the massive screen flickered. It distorted, pixelating into static. The audio of the serene wind and flowing water cut out, replaced by a sharp, high-pitched whine of feedback. The crowd gasped. Brett turned around, looking at the screen. "What is going on?" he shouted at his tech crew. "Fix it!" But they couldn't fix it, because the image on the screen resolved. It wasn't the ranch anymore. It was a video of an office late at night. It was grainy but clear. It showed a man leaning over a woman's shoulder, his hand gripping the back of her chair so hard his knuckles were white. The audio kicked in, booming through the ballroom speakers, loud enough to rattle the champagne flutes. "Type the code, Lily." Brett's voice snarled from the screen, undeniable and monstrous. "Do it, or I send the emails. I will destroy your father. I will burn that ranch to the ground." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the voice of the man on stage, threatening a woman who was sobbing. Brett froze, his face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked from the screen to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He realized in that second that he wasn't the king of the mountain. He was the man standing on the trapdoor, and I had just pulled the lever. The video played on, looming large over the ballroom, capturing every ugly detail in high definition. It showed Brett striking my daughter across the face, a sound that cracked through the speakers like a whip. It showed him grabbing her hair, forcing her face toward the screen. "Look at the camera," he sneered on the recording, his face twisted into a mask of pure malice. "Smile for the feds, honey. We are going to make you famous." Then came the confession, the moment of arrogance that sealed his fate. He laughed, turning away from her to pour himself a drink on camera. "It is almost too easy," he boasted to the empty room, his voice echoing in the silent hotel ballroom. "That old hillbilly thinks he is protecting his legacy. He doesn't know I am going to drain his land dry and leave him with nothing but dust." I am going to turn Silver Creek into a strip mine, and that stupid old man is going to thank me for it." The gasp from the audience was collective, a sudden intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. The investors, the socialites, the bankers, they all stared at the screen in horror. They weren't looking at a financial genius anymore. They were looking at a monster. Brett stood on stage, frozen, his hand still outstretched toward the screen as if he could physically block the projection. He looked small suddenly. The golden idol had cracked, revealing the rot underneath. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "It is a fake! It is AI! They made it up!" But Gus wasn't done. The video feed cut to black for a split second, and then a new image appeared. It wasn't a video this time. It was a document. A government document. The seal of the United States Department of the Interior was projected 10 feet tall behind Brett's head. Below it, in bold, undeniable letters, were the words, "Perpetual Conservation Easement." The crowd murmured, confused. They were money people, not land people. They didn't understand yet. Then the next slide appeared. It was a tax assessment from the Environmental Protection Agency. It listed Silver Creek Resources LLC, the company Brett had just purchased, the company he had bragged about owning. And next to the company name was a number in bright red. $4 million. Outstanding environmental remediation penalty, the text read. Immediate payment, past due. Status non-compliant. A man in the front row, a venture capitalist who had been ready to write Brett a check 5 minutes ago, stood up. "You don't have the water rights," he shouted, pointing at the screen. "That is a conservation easement. You can't drill, you can't develop, the land is worthless." Brett spun around, reading the documents on the screen for the first time. His eyes scanned the text frantically. He read the words, "Prohibition on commercial extraction." He read the words, "Owner assumes all historical liability." "No," he whispered the microphone, picking up his despair. "No, that is not right." He signed the deed. "I own the water." Then the final slide appeared. It was the chat log between Brett and the Russian mobster. "The order to kill us." Break lines cut the text read. "Make it look like an accident on the pass." That was the breaking point. The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, rushing for the exits, desperate to distance themselves from the man on stage. Investors were on their phones, screaming at their brokers to pull funding. The illusion of success had shattered, leaving only the jagged shards of criminal intent. Brett looked out at the sea of angry faces. He looked for his security, but his guards had vanished, melting away into the crowd the moment the tide turned. He was alone. Then the double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open again. This time it wasn't a cowboy and his daughter. It was a phalanx of agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI. Beside them were officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. "Brett Anderson," a voice boomed over the chaos. "Put your hands in the air." Brett looked for a way to run. He looked at the wings of the stage, but 2 agents were already coming up the stairs, guns drawn. He looked at the crowd, but there was no shelter there, only disgust. He collapsed to his knees. It wasn't a surrender of dignity, it was a collapse of spirit. He knelt on the stage, sobbing as the agents swarmed him. They hauled him up, roughly spinning him around and slamming him against the podium. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut cut through the noise of the room. "I didn't do it!" Brett screamed as they dragged him toward the stairs. It was her. It was the accountant. "She set me up." He locked eyes with Lily. She was standing tall in her red suit, watching him with a look of absolute cold detachment. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched him get carried away like trash. As the agents marched him past us, I stepped into the aisle, blocking their path for a second. The lead agent recognized me, probably from the file Parnell had sent over. He paused, giving me a moment. Brett looked at me, his face streaked with tears and snot. "You ruined me," he hissed. "You tricked me. That contract. You knew." I leaned in close so only he could hear me over the din of the crowd. "I didn't trick you, son," I said, my voice low and steady. "You wanted the ranch. You wanted the legacy. Well, you got it. You own every rock, every weed, and every debt." I pointed to the screen where the conservation document was still glowing. "You bought a nature preserve, Brett. You can't sell the water. You can't build your condos. All you have is a $4 million tax bill and a 20-year sentence for fraud." He started to scream, a raw animal sound of despair, but the agents shoved him forward, dragging him out of the ballroom and into the waiting lights of the police cruisers. I turned back to the stage where the screen finally went dark. The room was emptying out, the party over before the first toast could be made. I looked at Lily. She let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders dropping an inch. "It is over," she said. I put my arm around her, pulling her close. "It is over," I agreed. We walked out of the hotel, leaving the chaos behind us. Outside, the air was cool and smelled of rain. The city lights were bright, but for the first time in a long time, they didn't look threatening. They looked like promise. We had walked into the fire, and we had walked out the other side. We had burned down the lies, and what was left was the truth, solid and unshakable as the mountains waiting for us back home. The snow melted months ago, revealing the scars on the land and the fresh green grass pushing up through the thaw. The federal investigation was swift and brutal, but not for us. With the raw, unedited footage Gus pulled from the cloud, the United States Attorney dropped all charges against Lily before we even left Seattle. She walked out of that federal building not as a suspect in an embezzlement scheme, but as the star witness in the prosecution of the decade. Life on the ranch has a way of healing things that courtrooms can only adjudicate. Lily isn't just surviving, she is running the show. She took over as the financial director for the Silver Creek Conservation Trust, the nonprofit entity we established to manage the water rights. Ironically, Brett was right about one thing. There was immense value in that water. But instead of being bottled and sold to the highest bidder, the revenue from the conservation grants ensures that this valley will remain wild forever. Lily manages the accounts with the same sharpness she used to survive the corporate world, but now she smiles while she does it. I sit on the front porch, the wood warm under my boots, the smell of gun oil and sage filling the air. I have my old Winchester laid out across my lap, disassembled on a soft cloth. I run an oiled rag over the receiver, a slow, rhythmic motion that settles my mind. It is a ritual. A reminder that peace is something you have to maintain, something you have to keep clean and ready. Down in the garden, Lily is kneeling in the dirt, laughing at something Parnell just said. The old lawyer comes by every Sunday now, usually dragging Gus along to fish in the creek. They are arguing about fertilizer ratios while Lily plants a row of hardy wild roses along the fence line, replacing the ones the winter killed. She looks strong. Her hands are dirty, her hair is loose, and that haunted look of the victim is gone, replaced by the steady gaze of a woman who knows she owns her own ground. She looks up and catches me watching her. She waves a bright, happy gesture that belongs to the girl she was before all of this happened. I nod back, reassembling the rifle with a satisfying metallic click. I look out over the valley, the sun dipping low, casting long golden shadows across the grass. The world is full of men like Brett Anderson. Men who wear expensive suits and use fountain pens to rob you of your life. They use words like leverage and acquisition to disguise the fact that they are just common thieves. They think that because they have money and influence, they are the apex predators. But they forgot one fundamental rule of nature. You never back a father into a corner. You never threaten the offspring of a quiet man. Because in that moment, he stops being an old rancher. He stops being a citizen. He becomes the wolf at the door of the cave, baring his teeth, ready to tear the throat out of the world to keep his pack safe. I rack the slide of the rifle, chambering a round of nothing but air, just to hear the sound of the mechanism working perfectly. The ranch is safe. My daughter is safe. And God help the next man who tries to take them from me. This experience taught me that the deadliest traps aren't hidden in the wilderness, but in the fine print of a life built on lies. Brett believed his wealth made him untouchable, mistaking kindness for weakness and silence for submission. But he learned the hard way that integrity is a currency that never devaluates. We proved that truth, no matter how deeply buried under digital fabrications and threats, will always find the light. If you are fighting a battle against someone who thinks they own you, remember this: your worth is not defined by their ledger, but by your courage to stand your ground. If you believe that family is the only thing worth dying for, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were standing at that altar?